Miss Kraft is Daft. Chapter 3, Mr. Granite is dying. We had to walk 1,100,000 miles back to class in a single file. Nobody was being really quiet. Nobody wanted to get in trouble. With Mr. Klutz, I looked around for Mr. Granite, but I couldn't find him. When we passed the front office, our school nurse, Miss Cooney, pulled me out of the line. She is beautiful and has eyes that look like cotton candy. One time, she wanted me to marry her, but I couldn't because she was already married to some guy named Mr. Cooney. AJ, she whispered, please tell your class that Mr. Granite went home for the rest of the day. Is he going to be okay? I asked. Oh, yes, said Miss Cooney. He only has a cold. I ran to catch up with the rest of the class. They were just going into the room, and everybody was still on their best behavior. Even the guys folded their hands on their desks and kept their feet on the floor. It was weird. Where's Mr. Granite? Asked the Neil kid, whispered to me. Mr. Granite has a cold, I whispered. So he went home for the rest of the day. Spread the word. Neil turned around and whispered to Emily, Mr. Granite is old, so he went home for the rest of the day. Emily opened her eyes really wide, and then she turned around and whispered to Ryan, Mr. Granite is old, so he went to a rest home, she said. Ryan leaned over to whisper to Michael, old Mr. Granite was put in a home for the rest of his life. Michael turned around and whispered to Andrea, Mr. Granite was put in an old age home to rest until he's dead. Mr. Granite is dying? Shouted Andrea. Suddenly, everybody started yelling, screaming, and crying, and freaking out. But Mr. Granite is so young, wailed Michael. He's such a good man, groaned Neil the nude kid. I need to speak with the grief counselor, screamed Emily. Why? Everybody was moaning. Kids were weeping and holding their heads and wiping their tears. The girls were all talking about what they were going to wear to Mr. Granite's funeral. And that's when Mr. Klutz came running into the classroom like his head was on fire. What's the matter? He shouted. Is someone hurt? Mr. Granite is dying, yelled Andrea. No, he's not, said Mr. Klutz. He has a cold, so he went home for the rest of the day. Who told you he was dying? Ryan looked at me. Alexa looked at me. Michael looked at me. Emily looked at me. Everybody was looking at me. AJ told us that Mr. Granite is dying, Andrea said, pointing to me. I did not. You did too. Did not. Did too. We went on like that for a little while until Mr. Klutz clapped his hands together. 5 claps means shut up. Nobody knows why. Remember what I said about your behavior, said Mr. Klutz as he left the room. If you kids can't behave, some of you are going to be suspended. I'm not fooling around.